You guys, welcome to the panel. We'll start to get started now. Maybe close that back door. So I just want to introduce, is it Paul? Yeah, Paul. Paul, remind me your last name again? Say again? Ingram. So we're here with Paul Ingram, who works with the Tucson Sentinel. My name is Norberto Santana Jr. I'm with publisher for Voice of OC in Orange County, California. Manny Gonzalez is with the Latino Policy Forum, and we're going to talk a little bit about just covering immigration, kind of at the local level. I think we can speak a little bit to covering to the immigration issue at home in our major American cities. Paul, I think, can do the same. Maybe even you've got a bit of a border enforcement element as well to your community. We do in California as well, where we sometimes are dealing with ICE enforcement raids, or in our case, the border runs all the way up through northern San Diego. So, sometimes you'll have issues where people will see Border Patrol cars inside what they see as sort of metropolitan areas. And there's a lot of consternation that goes along with it. I'd say for us in Southern California, likely for us, immigration is very much a local issue. In the city of Santa Ana, where we are based, it is a 78% Latino population, mostly many from the state of Michoacan in Mexico. So issues involving anything involving Mexico is really a local story where we're at. Then our nearby city, Anaheim, is 54% Latino. More and more, it's changing everything. Lately, around the immigration debates, it's stepped up in the communities that we cover, much around the declaration of sanctuary cities. Santa Ana has declared itself a sanctuary city. Anaheim is tinkering now with calling itself a welcoming city. That comes from a Republican mayor there, Tom Tate. I'm not exactly sure what the definitions is there. And I think a lot of times, for us at least covering immigration, a lot of it comes down to the definitions. Even when a city declares itself sanctuary, there's a lot of questions about where do you participate or cooperate with ICE authorities and where you do not. Because in many places that see themselves as sanctuary cities, there still is coordination with ICE officials inside local jails. And so there's a lot of variations about that. There's talk now about sanctioning sanctuary cities. There's some legislation in California in terms of protecting cities from that. I'm not exactly sure how they can do that legally, but that is the broader debate in places like Santa Ana and Anaheim. The biggest thing that impacts us are the raids. You wake up every other day and you see sort of a raid of a community activist. They seem to be stepping up more. But even during the Obama administration, they called him the reporter-in-chief. So, there's kind of an irrationality to it in the cities, as far as I know. When raids happen, you don't know who's getting raided, who's not getting raided, where people go after the raids. There's all kinds of logistical problems that arise around parents showing up, or kids waiting at schools for parents that are not picking them up because they got swept up in a workforce raid. There's a ton of family impacts, especially in the communities that we cover, that are just off the charts. There's regardless of what your opinion is on immigration, there's a brutality to this system, a sort of randomness to it that is extremely painful on families on the ground, council members and other elected officials that are trying to sort of deal with it, especially in cities like ours, where it's a very much a big part of the population. DACA is a big issue these days. Most of our local schools, local universities are having to assure students of their status. For many of those students, they live in mixed status families. So you can imagine the stress of knowing that you're okay, but your mom and dad may not be. And so you may be fine to go to Cal State Fullerton, but when you come home, there may not be anybody there because mom or dad was picked up. So there's a level of that just is dealt with. It bleeds into every issue that we have, whether it's the census, whether it's healthcare outreach. You're dealing with communities that really, in a lot of ways, don't know how to interact with government. DACA, I think, was something that was particularly hurt the trust there because many of these people signed up and then the next thing they know, they're being identified for potential deportation. So it really makes it difficult for a lot of community activists, government officials, government agencies to sort of, in a sense, service the communities that they are there to work with. That's just in a very plain. So for us, immigration comes up on a daily basis, whether we're covering the county of Orange, the city of Santa Ana, or Anaheim. We have primarily a municipal focus, but again, immigration becomes a local story for us almost on a daily basis. Paul, do you want to speak a little bit to that as well, the situation in Tucson?
Sure. I mean, Arizona is in kind of a strange position because, especially after SB 1070, the state really became a pass-through for immigrants who are moving through, coming up through either the ports or through the desert, and then going elsewhere. For the large part, a lot of people live in Phoenix state, but Tucson has a fairly small immigrant population, and that population is in some ways more integrated and better at having a kind of wider community to help protect themselves. There's a much better kind of protection group that I think to some extent has kept ICE at bay about really pushing on people. What we see instead is people getting picked up individually in traffic stops and then being traded over to Border Patrol. And so it makes it much harder for a community response to even happen because that person gets pulled over, Border Patrol shows up, they get picked up. And especially since where we are in the relationship to the border, we really see people sometimes getting sent across the border deported within 24 hours. So it means that the system is in some ways much faster and much more aggressive, but also really hidden. And then, of course, in Arizona, we have the two big ICE prisons in Eloy and Florence. And so lots and lots of people are going there and then kind of adjudicated out. So it has some really different problems. Our court system has been people have been remarkably successful at getting people to stay or getting some kind of deferral, which you don't see in places like Georgia or say Chicago, other places where it's a lot more difficult. So we're kind of in a strange position in a way that we don't have the kind of aggressive ICE enforcement.
Manny, what are you seeing here in the Chicago area, both in terms of new developments and just managing the relationships?
So Chicago has an interesting history with Latinos who've lived here over the years. There's always been a large Mexican population, large population of Latinos who immigrated here from Cuba, large Latino population from Puerto Rico. Immigrants have been sort of the one thing that's kept Chicago's population figures afloat over the past maybe 15, 20 years. All of the city's population gains have been thanks to immigration. And probably since 2015, 2014, we've been seeing much lower immigration in Chicago. And as a result, we're seeing the city's population starting to decrease. But the city's seeing some really difficult times. You have an older generation of Latinos who've been here who are not immigrants. You have a newer generation of Latinos who are immigrants and they're from basically all over Latin America. And somehow there's a disconnect between the two, and because of that disconnect, there's a growing fear that anyone and everyone with brown-colored skin can be picked up by an ICE agent anytime. Little Village, which has historically been a predominantly Latino neighborhood in Chicago, it's accounted for about almost $1 billion in city revenue in past years, has seen 40 to 50% decreases in revenue at the shops there because Latinos are just afraid to show their faces in public. Even Latinos who are citizens, they're afraid to show their faces in public. Why is that? I think a lot of it's because ICE has been very active and very much more conniving nowadays than they have been under the Obama administration, and that they're actively going to locations where Latinos congregate, schools, churches, hospitals, courthouses, and looking to deport Latinos there. In many cases, there's actually been a lot of protest over this, not just in Chicago, but in many other large cities, where ICE agents will impersonate local police officers to question someone, get into somebody's home, and detain them. Not too long ago, I want to say about 3 months ago, there was a man who was shot in his home by ICE agents who went to deport him, or went to detain him. They came to his home, didn't identify themselves as ICE agents, shot him, and later it turned out that the guy was actually a legal resident. He wasn't an immigrant, and there was just no recourse. So a lot of Latino organizations in Chicago are working with our senators to try to hold ICE more accountable. Right now, we're not sure what sort of parameters ICE agents work under, what kind of training they get as far as tactical skills go. We know what our local police officers have to go through. If a local police officer is involved in a shooting, obviously they have to assume suspension until the shooting has been, or I don't know if it's called suspension, or they have to take leave and while the shooting is investigated. We don't know if that happens with ICE. They don't disclose any of that. We don't know why or for what purpose ICE would perform an immigration roundup, why they would need an assault rifle to do that, which has happened, I think, in California. So really just trying to hold ICE more accountable and make them more accountable for their actions.
Paul, what have you seen in Arizona in terms of just community reactions to the new administration? Is there any movement there with lawmakers or community groups that just changing or challenging the situation more?
There was a big push, especially in January, among community groups who wanted to put forward documents basically explaining to people what their rights were. And they also did things where they had people put up signs on their front yard basically saying, "You're not allowed to come here." And it seemed focused on police, but it was really about trying to keep Border Patrol or ICE or HSI kind of at bay to give people a little bit of breathing room, and also to explain people's rights about when can agents come into your house, what's a warrant look like, those sorts of things. And I think that's going to become more and more important, especially as ICE agents are sort of acting as police officers, but there's still a sense that when they show you a warrant, it's a sheet signed by the local ICE officer. For people to try to understand the difference, that they don't have to actually answer the door, they don't have to answer a text message, they don't have to answer things from ICE, is going to take a lot of work. But that's what we see right now. The other thing that we've seen in Tucson for a long time is these clinics that actually take people who have a case moving forward and really try to give them legal representation or some form of legal representation, even if it's not something going to the court. That's become really important. There's some data from TRACK, which is a project by Syracuse, that shows that people who have representation are 14 times as likely to win their cases not. So even the free help that's available at a church in Tucson on Saturdays can mean that some people can actually win their cases. And it also, really complicated cases get pushed to pro bono lawyers who actually work here and seem actually fairly successful in getting people either deferred action or stays or some kind of help.
Paul, have you seen anything along the lines of scams in terms of, we see those in Southern California a lot, where immigrants are attracted by some people that aren't even lawyers? I know the bar has taken some action in California about that, but just that idea, as you just said, to piggyback on it, but the idea that there's also this movement now to sort of take in a lot of that money and promise things that aren't possible. Have you seen that there?
All the time. Two really cases where people went into Sanctuary Church here, a fairly national story in 2014. Both of those people had their cases worked on for 3 or 4 years by notorios, and one couple spent $12,000 that they gave to a guy who told them that he was going to work on their case, and he blew off deadlines and did some documents and ultimately put them in a position where the father was about to be deported. And that was really because the notorios, were, as they're usually called, just took the money and ran. So yeah, I think that's very typical. And I think that we'll see more of that, especially as people get desperate. There's really kind of underground economy of people saying, well, hey, I can help you, I can file out the right paperwork for you, I can get you deferred action, I can help you, and we'll charge them several $1,000s, and then either do very little or nothing at all.
Let's take some questions. I think we have one out there real quick.
So one of the first things that I remember you saying is that these sort of incidents or very, very much newsworthy things happen on a regular to everyday basis. I'm interested in seeing how, or I just want to know how you guys approach that in a way that will make readers want to read things over and over again. Because in Ohio, we deal with an opiate crisis, and our editor is very avid that we don't report on it every day because he feels no one's going to read it. And so I'm just wondering how much sadness people can read about and come back to every day. And I was wondering if you guys had any ideas or things about that sort of thing.
I mean, for us, you're right, it's a hard tale, plus it's the same tale, and as Manny was mentioning, many times out of ICE and these authorities, you can't get information on people. Sometimes there's long lags as to where people are at, where they're being detained, the circumstances of the situations that happen. We follow them. We've had some very highly publicized beatings of local police, of immigrants. We've had some instances of people that are transgendered having issues with detention. So what we try to do at Voice of OC is follow it by issue, so that we try to, as you said, keep it unique, keep responding to it. I mean, the community center where I have our offices just a week ago was not raided, but somebody who was a volunteer at the community center was picked up, and automatically there's petitions, there's families that are moving, but as you said, it's a challenging story to cover every single day. You're asking yourself, well, what's special about this case that I didn't do last week? But like always, you use your news lens there a little bit. You're trying to also inform the community through these stories. So you're trying to kind of get to them. Sometimes it's about showing the rest of the families that are impacted. Sometimes it's more of a story about detention and some of the issues that are brought up there, like with the transgender community, about how they're segregated, how they're protected, and frankly some of the fiscal issues that come into play. But again, tough agencies to you ask ICE quickly, what's the fiscal impact about creating new spaces to keep to detain transgender people? They don't speak about that kind of stuff.
And something to that. Also, too, I mean, I know that since we started talking, all we've been talking about is ICE and its relationship with immigration. You talked about how can you do other stories that bring more dimension. And if you think about it, immigration kind of, it involves every beat that you'd find in a newsroom. Immigration affects education. Immigration affects business. Immigration affects sports. Immigration affects every beat imaginable. Immigration has some type of impact on that beat. As a journalist, it's your responsibility to go and seek out what those impacts are, how those are being affected by the current condition, the current political climate. For example, of education. Right now in Chicago, immigration is a huge issue because you're seeing Chicago public schools losing a lot of immigrant kids who are going off to suburban school districts. Well, Chicago public schools gets a lot of money from the state to teach bilingual education to English learning students. That's a lot of money out of CPS. There's a teacher shortage in Illinois, vast teacher shortage. The teacher shortage is even compounded more by the shortage of teachers who are capable of instructing English learning students. In a day and age when we had education reform in Illinois that set aside $110 million for bilingual education, we have all this money, we don't have teachers to spend it on because, either our certification rules are too strict to get a skilled teacher that can connect with a student body that doesn't speak English, or there just aren't enough potential teachers coming out of the pipeline, out of colleges, who have the training or ability to deal with a diverse student population. And what does that really? What's the effect of that? What's the effect on the students? Do students have a harder time learning when their teacher, when they can't connect with the teacher because of a language barrier? We've seen students who are, wrongly segregated from general student body and put into special education programs because they're not slow learners, they're just second language learners. And then on the flip side, there's studies that show that having the ability to speak two languages increases your learning potential on other subject matters in the area. So there's statistics that show that there's studies that show that it's a great benefit for children to be able to be bilingual.
I just wanted to ask what you see as the role is or should be in covering this story, the large story, and is it different from what it's been in past years? Has our role changed in your mind?
Absolutely.
How so?
Language matters, and the way we speak about the topic matters. There was mention of the Obama administration. They called him the deporter-in-chief. He deported many undocumented immigrants. Why now are people more afraid of getting deported than when Obama was president? Well, because we have a president who is more vocal about his intentions to, rid our country of undocumented immigrants.
Is it better to be vocal or to be secret about it?
He doesn't keep it a secret, but not just that, but he also ties immigrants to rapists and murderers and drug dealers. So, as a journalist, I think it's the responsibility and the importance to really cut through the myths and cut through that political dialogue to get to the heart of the story, get to the facts, and let people form their own opinions.
Do you think it's being done successfully, or do you think we have a ways to go?
We have a ways to go, but we've made some progress. I was a journalist for 15 years, and the last newspaper I worked at, the Denver Post, I can recall back in 2003, 2004, we had a newsroom-wide meeting where we all sat around and discussed how are we going to label undocumented immigrants. Everybody was like, well, they're illegal. Well, no, they're not illegal. There are two different kinds of undocumented immigrants. There are the immigrants that come across the border illegally, violating violating federal misdemeanor laws. That doesn't make them a criminal. But half of undocumented immigrants in this country came over legally with a visa and overstayed that visa. They are not in violation of any laws, rather they're in violation of local ordinances. So they're basically their crime is the same as if you ran a stop sign. If you run a stop sign, are you deemed a criminal? Are you deemed an illegal driver? You're not. But these folks are placed into that category of illegal alien. So we had this newsroom-wide meeting. It was a very heated discussion. And at the end, we all determined that, yes, the correct way to label people who are here illegally should be undocumented immigrant. That lasted about 2 weeks before you start seeing stories again, illegal immigrant. And it was so pervasive in every story we did. If there was a car, like a rollover, a traffic accident, somebody was killed, the person had a Latino last name. In the story, there was like, police have not said if the person is an illegal immigrant or not. Has absolutely no bearing on the case, right? Victims of crimes, police have not disclosed whether the person was an illegal immigrant just because their last name is like Gonzalez. So we're slowly evolving, but I feel like with the current administration, they're moving us back into the territory of where we're devolving.
Paul, do you want to speak to that in Arizona? I mean, are you seeing anything different than what you were doing before?
Well, in a lot of ways, things are the same in Tucson, and which is kind of a strange situation in a way, because I think especially in January and February, there was a real sense that something was going to happen. But it's been really the same, but there's always that sense that Border Patrol is really going to be the ones doing the kinds of enforcement processes. One thing that's interesting here is Arizona only has one sheriff that has 287G, which is the program where they hold people for ICE and actually contact ICE, and then ICE picks them up when they're finished with their criminal holding. Here, the County Sheriff, which is where I'm in, has said that he won't do that because he doesn't need to, because Border Patrol already does that. He already has this enforcement. So there's not that they're protecting immigrants, but they're protecting people who might be considered the phrase criminal alien, but instead that they're just putting it into Border Patrol's hands, which I think for them is convenient. One thing I want to caution everybody is when talking about, especially to ICE, is I think, and Border Patrol, but mostly ICE, is when they talk about someone as a criminal alien, be really thoughtful about what they mean by that. Because ICE has a tendency to take every kind of felony, every kind of misdemeanor, and put them into a big bush, or report the absolute worst crime that someone has ever been accused of, even if they were never convicted of that crime. So if somebody was convicted of or was accused of having drugs, but they couldn't find drugs on them or they were released, that person is considered a person who possessed or had or is a drug dealer. And ICE will always kind of discuss it in that way. And sometimes a criminal alien can be someone here who was actually given something called Operation Streamline, where they were given a felony for crossing into the United States. So that is included, and so you want to be very thoughtful about kind of carving that apart and really kind of pushing ICE to tell you exactly what that crime is, or what the crimes they're accused of. If you can, it's difficult to get, is try to get someone's A file, and that's an alien file, and that really is a document that actually shows all the things that ICE and CBP, all throughout the DHS components, have done with this person. And that you have to request it. It's difficult to get, but if you can get it, it actually really shows what this person's being accused of. And that's the thing that Border Patrol and ICE agents are usually looking at. So it's always worth keeping that in mind. And ICE really has a particular point of view in sometimes making people look as absolutely bad as they can. Even when you really start looking at the crimes that they're accused of, you go, well, okay, he went speeding at 30 miles above the speed limit. Is that the same thing as being accused of, say, a DUI or rape or murder?
One thing I threw out from Southern California that we have definitely seen is more of a, there's now a Latino elected class. You know, there's council members in Santa Ana and Anaheim. There's a Senate majority leader in the state Senate, all of whom have become much more vocal on this issue, frankly, than they were before. Santa Ana was a lot sort of calmer place on this issue. And after the new administration, it's largely, I don't want to say become radicalized, but these elected officials have had to kind of stake out their positions a little bit more. So, for example, Santa Ana had never declared itself as a sanctuary city, but after the Trump administration, it very much came out that way. It's looking to shut down an ICE contract. It gets a lot of, these elected officials get a lot of pressure from their communities to say, I want to see you be more vocal on that.
Is that to say that it's become politicized only because the administration has changed from one party to another?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily, but yeah, I would say that it's become more politicized because before, let's say with Obama and even during the Bush administration, you didn't really have people that were saying things like, if you declare yourself a sanctuary city, we're coming after you and we're going to be doing more raids. So there wasn't that pressure on a Latino elected official to kind of come out that much more aggressive towards the federal government, where there I think there is now, and I think that's much more in there. I started off my sort of chat this by talking about the irrationality of it all. Because for the most part, you're walking around and it's a normal day. And then all of a sudden, immigration can sort of pop up as an issue. But, as Manny said, in the communities, at least that we cover, it's part of the ongoing sort of transformation of these areas.
Chicago's been in an interesting place because Trump has actually taken aim at Chicago many times in his stump speeches. In some cases, he's blamed illegal immigrants as being the reason why our crime rate or our murder rate is so high, where there are no facts that go to that. But Chicago is also in an interesting place because Latinos are now the largest ethnic minority in the city. We just surpassed African Americans, and it's kind of a strange time because African Americans have, by and large, had a very large piece of the political pie in Chicago, and the way it's getting played out now is with there being fewer African Americans in Chicago, more Latinos in Chicago. They're seeing local politicians pit the two minorities against each other. You have black aldermen saying, why do we have to have a municipal ID system for those Latinos, or who cares about the DACA people? Those people, don't affect, don't help us. In fact, they take jobs away from us. And you're seeing people at the federal government level, at the state level, at the local level, make it seem like the blacks and the Latinos have to be warring against each other because if we give anything to Latinos, it's got to come away from the blacks, right? so we're in a really precarious position right now where we're trying to like keep relations smooth between the Black and Latino populations and get their support, especially around DACA, especially around undocumented immigrants.
And that story is being reported.
Well, some more or
One more
less.
question.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, actually, I spoke with a columnist from the Sun-Times today about that, so she's looked for a story more.
Fascinating story.
okay. Anyway, it seems like it'd be the countervailing argument would be common cause against a president who has expressed hatred or disdain for both groups. So anyway, my question is why are we're here to discuss this issue now, even though there may be fewer people deported than under the deporter-in-chief. But things have definitely changed, and I was looking for a way in which you could quantify that change and that growth of irrationality. My hypothesis is that, good reporters did stories on breaks in the system. Maybe during Obama, there was also a 10-year-old girl being stopped on her way to emergency gallbladder surgery, or there was the dad of a Yale senior being picked up when he was supposed to get a green card. That bait and switch. That may have happened, but that was seen as sort of a exception in the system. But maybe there's a sense that there are no rules in the system, or nothing stopping ICE from just. I'm feeling like picking up a few. My quote is a little light this month.
It's very much that's just that is the sort of rationality of it. Paul, you want to talk a little bit to that? Just in terms of
It's really important to understand that almost all the cases that ICE does are on case-by-case basis. So the system is built to be arbitrary. If the ICE officer hasn't eaten that day, he may decide that he's not going to give somebody a stay, where the next day they can give a stay. The fact that public pressure creates the situation where people can get stays tells you that the system is arbitrary. It's not about a legal structure. It's about whether or not the ICE officer feels like he likes public pressure or hates public pressure. We've seen that in Tucson. We've seen that in Phoenix. I think the thing that's changed is that ICE seems unafraid of being criticized now. Where a year ago, 2 years ago, if there was a public protest, ICE tended to blanch at that. Now it seems like they're willing to do it because I think they feel like they have the support of the president. And they know that they're not going to get a call from the White House saying, "What are you guys doing? You're making us look bad. Cut it out."
I think we saw the same thing in Southern California, a difference in sort of maybe aggressiveness a bit between GW, Obama, and the current administration. It's more, as Paul said, during Obama, there seemed to be a calming of it a bit. The same irrationality, as you said, the same things pop up. But we did see a little bit more during the last few years where you would see community groups rally, do petitions, things like that, and then people seem to be getting stays. And I say seem because, as Paul said, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult system to have a good sense of, okay, work this way. When you're, as a reporter, you're talking to ICE, to some of the press people, it can be challenging to find out, for example, how many deportations did you get in Orange County last 6 months compared to previous? Well, we don't keep them that way. We keep them for all of Southern California. Why would you do that? Because, it's like, how am I supposed to know whether or not we do have a different situation or not, right? What are the numbers? Why in the world would you not just, we know that you collect them, because every single jail that refers, immigrants or others detained in these areas, they report them. But yet, it's a difficult number to get. And so, again, that rationality just remains.
And there's another dimension, too. In politics, what they say is, like, it's not necessarily the truth or the facts that matter as much as the feeling. And what that feeling is the political climate that we live in it's present now in everybody's lives, right? I can tell you that, like, during the Obama administration, for whatever it was worth, we didn't live under the constant, like, news platform of, like, what's Obama doing today? How's that affecting my daily life? In fact, you probably would see a lot of people say, well, whatever Obama does, it's not going to affect me in my home. That's not so much the feeling anymore. Even if the facts and the numbers don't back it up, people feel genuinely threatened by the president, by the words that he uses, by ICE. Whether they're any more worse off now than they were when Obama was president, I guess we'll wait till Trump's term is over and compare the numbers. But for right now, there's a genuine climate of fear, and that's something that the president has promoted, and it's had demonstrable effects on people. We've had cases of children who aren't showing up to school because they're afraid that their parents are going to get deported while they're in class. It's affected children in classrooms. It's affected people seeking out health care. People afraid to get cancer treatment because they're afraid that ICE is going to come get them. Whether they're under any other danger more now than they were a year ago, that's left to be seen. But there's still this pervasive fear. Women who are victims of crimes, domestic abuse, they're afraid to report it because they're afraid of the police apprehending them and turning them over to ICE. So the forum was really involved. My organization was really involved in the Illinois Trust Act, where we passed recently the toughest legislation that prevents local law enforcement from turning over people to immigration without a federal warrant present. And we did that with a Republican governor in office. And Governor Rauner has taken lumps from every conservative in the country because of it. But that was necessary because not only did it affect people who were going to school, people who were working, but it was even affecting cops. Law enforcement came out in support of this law because they were having a difficult time doing their job, because whenever they went out into the community, people were running away from them. Nobody was reporting crimes. People didn't want to be witness to crimes because they didn't want to be hassled about their immigration status.
Yeah, I was just, like this man mentioned over here, maybe stuff happened under the Obama administration, but do you guys feel like there really are more incidences of this kind of stuff happening, these incidents with ICE happening, that you're reporting on, or is it kind of a...
It's tough to know the numbers. You don't see the numbers. You don't see the numbers in real time.
Yeah.
I think my biggest complaint, I did a year-long investigation when I was at the Orange County Register on deportations, just generally what happens, how the machinery works. And, it's a $5-6 billion machine, and it is not very open. It is not very, in some ways, rational. I used to go down to Tijuana, which is right on the border of California and Mexico, and I'd talk to the mayor of Tijuana, and I'd say, how does it feel to have, let's assume that the American designation of criminal alien is correct. How does it feel to have every single criminal from the West Coast over dropped off at your front door? And then expect that you're going to be able to deal with that. And also that has security impacts on the other side. People like in El Salvador have talked about the challenges of getting a lot of deportations there and having the MS-13, the gang implications of that are also considerable. So one thing I have found, again, that's why I say it's an irrational system. And I understand the need to police your immigration laws. The challenge here in this system, and again, I don't know if the data is there, it's designed to not produce data in a way.
Well, I was just curious because, seeing that there's kind of a rash of more stories being reported, I'm wondering if you are receiving any kind of reader backlash to that. Like with the Trump administration, you also have Trump voters.
Sure.
Maybe are reading this and they're not happy because you're constantly reporting this, or they're not happy with, what's your reader demographic like?
Well, I laugh because I chat in Orange County where I'm at. I actually have a lot of Trump voters. So when we report stories, we have two very different opinions to them. We just keep, the key here, I think, the message for reporters is just do your job. Yeah. Just do your job. Just go and say what you see, what the impacts are on it, what some of the lack of transparency is, how much dollars is all this costing. Because I think, again, that's why I constantly refer to the system as an irrational one, because it's just, as you said, hard data is not easy to get. Now, what you do see is in the lack of hard data, you see a lot of emotionalism and a lot of sort of opinions about what's happening. We see a lot of that. What we try to do as a newsroom is just do our job, be engine mechanics. Just try to answer. When there are raids, try to ascertain as best we can. But the real challenge is this type of system lends itself to a lot of sort of emotional reporting about how people feel as opposed to being able to get at real data, whether it's about the real impact of immigrants in a community or the real impact of increased enforcement on that community. It's very, very challenging.
And social media has certainly also played a part in that, I think, because social media has kind of given everybody a platform, and it's kind of become, among politicos like myself, it's become an understanding that if you can go out and say the most divisive thing and most off-the-wall thing, it increases your chances of getting quoted in the next day's paper, thereby your potential for getting another job or getting more work is expanded upon. But to your point, yeah, we don't know if there are more immigrant raids now more than there were a year ago. But I can tell you that I've lived in Chicago for 6 years, and I've never ever heard of like a citywide alert go out because ICE was somewhere. But after Trump was elected, there was like 3 or 4 months there where we were just getting calls. It was going out on Twitter that, a Department of Homeland Security officer was seen on an L train. Don't go to that station. People were avoiding going to like an L station in the dead of winter. And so, a lot of that was passed up on Twitter, Facebook. It was, I mean, I love social media, but, there are good things and bad things.
I have one, I guess it's a comment or a question or observation or something, but I think, trying to figure out how to cover all of this under the Trump administration as reporters in mostly community settings, I think it's important to remember that this is humanity that we're talking about. Why would somebody leave their homeland and go someplace else and uproot their family and live in substandard housing conditions with terrible jobs and no services for their families? Like, what are the conditions in, say, Mexico, for example, economically? Is the sugar crop, tanking? Is agriculture down? Telling a broader story about the stories of the reality of the humanity of why are people from other countries coming here? If we're suffering economically and if tech is changing everything for savvy Americans who can afford, a new iPhone every 6 months, how is the changing times affecting countries that don't have that economy? And trying to find a way to tell the stories of the people in your community, not just those people who are living in the shadows, but people who are going to get their citizenship every 6 months at the state house or whatever, however often that happens, and get their story. How long did they wait? How hard was it? How were they discriminated against? And trying to balance it.
Information, again, as reporters, information is what breaches a lot of these differences, where you actually get more information from all sides.
But here's another thing that's not told very often in the media, and it's the flip side of that, and it's an institutional system that's set up to take advantage of immigrants, right? We have an economy that's built on low-wage labor. We have employers that take in low-wage laborers and offer them no protection, offer them no assistance in getting visas, and when their workers are rounded up and carted off, they just go out and get more low-wage workers. Nobody holds them accountable. We operate in a system where, and I hate to characterize it as this, but immigrants don't just man our low-wage jobs, right? They don't just work in our hotels. They don't just work in our fields, although obviously a lot of them do. But they also, work in a lot of very important positions in our society. They're doctors, they're engineers, they're IT people. They're in every walk of life you'll find an immigrant. But we don't talk about how the system is set up to take advantage of those people and who in the system is doing it.
What we do is profit. Those are some of the new wrinkles. The new booming private prison big shots.
Sure.
Sort of the post story on spending tons on Trump company hotels right now.
I would be curious to see how many deportations are delayed because those folks are supposed to be delayed or deported are being detained in those private prisons. Those private prisons make a lot of money. They don't, they have no motivation to want to get those people out and deport them.
Right, from like the Louisiana prison warden who didn't want these nonviolent offenders released because we got a lot of work to get done.
Exactly.
So I think we're done on time. Fair, again, a wonderful panel. We're up here for a bit. So if anybody has follow-up questions, happy to take them and be helpful however we can.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send me an email.
Feasting on his feet.